All right, we're live.
Hello, everybody. Today with us in the podcast, episode 5, Meeta Chris Wilson, we have the man, the big guy, Chris Wilson himself, the lead
Hey, how are you
developer.
doing?
How's it going, Chris?
That's good, thanks. Yeah, how about you guys?
It's
All
great.
good.
I just want to personally thank you for coming out on another podcast. It's just a pleasure to hear from you and see your interaction with the community. Everybody really appreciates it, and we have a lot of great questions for you today.
Thanks, I'm looking forward to answering them.
Before we get this thing going, I want to give out a couple of thank yous. I want to thank Twitch for allowing us to do this kind of thing. It's a great support we've been getting from them. Thank you again, Twitch. I want to thank Grinding Gear Games for making a great free-to-play game that everybody can enjoy. It's a lot of fun. You can find it on Steam, or you can download it directly from the website pathofexile.com. And I also want to thank the mods and you guys, the viewers, for attending today. It means a lot to us. You ready to get this thing going? I'm ready.
Yeah, sounds good. Just a reminder, the viewers, Chris is a businessman and the lead developer, so try to keep your questions pertaining to his specific role in the company. He doesn't get to the the nitty-gritty details of the numbers on like the level of your gems and how they scale, but he has a overall grasp on the design as a whole and the direction. So keep those questions coming. Greatly appreciate that.
All right, Chris. So this is how we're going to be doing this today. Each of us are going to be asking you questions during like a little 5-minute segment, and then we're going to go into a live question and answer with the viewers for the remaining 40 minutes or so. After that, we'll say our goodbyes. Awesome. And then we're going to go into our own personal live segments after that. So with that being said, I'm going to start off my segment. So
Okay.
the Path of Exile forums, they're great for guides, builds, shopping. I love it there. My personal problem is there's a big issue with there's been this thread that's been going around, a big problem within Path of Exile, and I wanted to personally ask you your opinion on this. How exactly do devours look like under the ground? Can you clarify that for us?
So the Devourer was initially called the Root Spider back when we designed it at the start of development, and it was like the second monster design for the game after the Blood Monkey. And there's all this really old concept art going around, and to be honest, none of it covers what they look like under the ground. This is a mystery, and the only person who would really know is Eric. He's the artist, he drew the picture. And we haven't dared ask him. I mean, some of the stuff he's been coming up with for Act 4 is looking like really freaky, so we're worried about what's under the ground there. But that thread with people's fan interpretations was the best thing to happen to our forum. It really is good.
Obviously a troll question and not really a problem. That thread is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay. Now for my real question. All right. As you know, there's the 4-month leagues, and during those 4-month leagues, you usually have 2 race leagues, and they have great rewards, great incentive for people to keep playing. Whereas the 4-month leagues, around the 2-month hump, people tend to get disinterested or maybe switch to another game. With your permission, may I have your opinions on a matter, or maybe a way to help out with this?
Sure, go on.
Okay. Currently in the State of Game, there's 8 challenges, and the 8 challenges are great. However, I feel personally that it's all or nothing. You either get all 8 and you get a T-shirt, which is awesome. I love that T-shirt. Or you get challenges as you go, but you don't get anything, no incentive to keep playing. I had an idea where you get maybe perhaps increase the number of challenges to per se maybe 15, and then every 3 challenges or so you have an unlockable microtransaction that if you want to make it cost money, that's up to you, but maybe you can have it at a discounted rate, so that way people have that, and make it so it's like legendary or legacy, so that you can only obtain these for these 4-month leagues. What are your opinions on that, Chris?
That's very cool. I mean, it's a slightly higher budget version of what we're doing, though I can definitely see it helping, encouraging players to finish some more challenges. It's not a particularly large percentage of the player base that actually engages with the challenges heavily. I mean, they're designed for bragging rights and for showing off, so putting something like this together, it would be nice if there was also an option for the not-so-hardcore players, the ones who enjoy a few months of playing in a new league and look for another game to play before the next 4-month league starts. There's actually a solution as well that we're working on, which we're going to be announcing later today in the form of a heavily incentivized 2-week race, which feeds characters back into invasion afterwards. But your idea is very cool, and I'll bring it up with the guys because we're in the middle of planning the next 4-month leagues right now, and things like what challenges they contain are totally up in the air. And if we can come up with 15 cool ones, that would definitely be an interesting way to spice it up.
And obviously, you would keep, like 3 easier challenges, but keep those 3 really bragging right challenges. Killing Uber at Syrian hardcore or getting all of the Val items. Those are really hard. Not like you said, the casual gamer can't always get that. And obviously, you would make maybe that incentive at the 15 challenge mark, the T-shirt, along with some amazing microtransaction that people can unlock.
Yeah, it'd be really nice to visually see something like that can differentiate a player. He may get like these unlockable microtransactions through the achievement system, but like without having to send that player a tell, just looking at him in Sarn, that guy is like a really legitimate player of the game.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Well, that's the only question I had for you, Chris. So let's go on to what Terrex has to say to you.
All right. Hey, Chris, it's a pleasure. My first question is about muling in races. Is muling in racing an intended design, and has there ever been a discussion on adjusting its impact in races?
It's intended as far as it's part of the rules and currently allowed, right? Like we have that stash turned on for a reason, and if players want to do fancy things involving swapping gems between classes and like wasting the time associated with that, then they can. However, if skills like Spectral Throw are so good that it's predominantly muled onto another class, then this might be something where it's encouraging players to play the game in a way that isn't necessarily as fun. And we certainly have had discussions about disabling the stash, maybe trying it out in some races. We want to make sure that it's well tested and it's as fun as it can be.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Because right now, like a lot of players, they're doing like 1 to 2, like well, 1 on average, but like muling is very, very helpful at the start of a race, whether or not you're using it to get like another skill gem or like an item. But on my second question is, there have been some race season rewards with very appealing items, like Season 5 and Season 6 with Anvarius and Divination Distillate. My question is, are there race rewards based on how much participation they are getting throughout like the previous seasons, or like maybe when participation in races has been high, you might make like less rare items for the rewards and make it more about cosmetic elixir? Or how do you base your race rewards for the season?
We try to vary it quite a lot to not just go for powerful ones each season, and part of the reason here is there's a bit of a power escalation thing where if you go to a certain level and then you bring ones out that are very slightly better, the players are happy, and then very slightly better again, the players are happy, but you're creeping the reward level upwards. And so we try to, in some cases, go for a season that, like, for example, the current one here has some very desirable cosmetic appearances at low thresholds, but it doesn't necessarily have as many punchy power rares. And we're trying, where possible, to both experiment with this to see what's most effective and to make sure that we're not just following a linear pattern of gradually raising the power until eventually you're getting Windripper at 100 points.
All right, yeah, because like the cosmetics are really cool. I know a lot of people like really using the skin transfers and making their characters look cool, and I'm a big fan of that myself, being able to customize your character. And my third question is, there has been numerous cutthroat event tests so far mixed in with Season 7. From these cutthroat tests, what kind of important information, or like what kind of information in general, have you gathered to make adjustments to cutthroat currently? And is there, or do you feel that is enough to future develop this kind of league?
I wasn't actually in the meeting when they went through the data from Cutthroat, so I'm only like judging from how people are acting rather than what the data said. But it looks like they've made quite a lot of tweaks, especially to the level thresholds for invading people's areas that we were playing with. There are some more things that we have on the list to experiment with for Cutthroat, and for example, something that I've been interested in trying is to artificially restrict the quest progression so you can't get past a certain act or a certain difficulty, so that now becomes the end game. For example, if you run a one-day event but you can't leave normal difficulty, then you don't get people disappearing off into Merciless and becoming over-leveled. And there's a few things like that that we want to experiment with before we try substantially longer events. And to some extent, now that development is ramping up really hard on the 1.2.0 expansion, we haven't had time to fiddle with Cutthroat as much as we were earlier in the season. So we'll probably run more events. It just requires us to get some development in there first.
Okay, that sounds good, because Cutthroat is a lot of fun, and I know a lot of people are very interested in Path of Exile's PvP. But like you said, like when people start leaving Axe or like going to the next difficulty, that's when the PvP kind of starts to die off, and the fights are a bit like far and few.
Yeah, I definitely think we should be putting players together and keeping them together as much as possible in that league.
And that's my last question.
All right, Hedgie, if you want to ask Chris your 5-minute opinionated questions, do it. It's your chance.
So my questions mainly have to deal with what PoE has in store for the future. Are there any plans to take Path of Exile into esports as some kind of with some kind of spectator mode, whether it be competitive racing or tournament ideas for PvP in the future? And I understand that PvP has not yet been announced, but the current meta of the PvP is very fun and has a lot of potential. Are there any updates to that?
So we're very careful when throwing around the word esports ourselves, because in order for something to be an esport, it has to be really, really fun and repeatable. And while Path of Exile's PvP and races are both very cool, we don't think they're yet up to the standard where we'd want to promote them as esports. Mm-hmm. And there's more work that can be done there. And it's interesting because it's kind of a different direction for the company. It's the kind of thing where we have to start handling, have multiple people coordinating tournaments and people working out prizes and, potentially running live events and having lots of industry contact with partners and that kind of thing.
Right.
Which is certainly very, very cool, as long as enough of the player base are engaged with it. And that's something we're trying to determine is, like, the Path of Exile player base is so many different types of players. It has both the really hardcore racers, it has the people who really enjoy PvP, and it has a lot of people who just want to play the game for the story and will come back whenever there's a major patch. And it's very hard to know where the company should be focusing its development efforts. And to some extent, we're kind of hitting all the bases at the moment, but none of them as in detail as we would if we had good data on where we want PvP to be in the future. Like, for example, right now, a lot of our development effort is going towards Act 4. And a lot of the development effort is going towards the 1.2.0 expansion. We have a little bit of development effort towards racing and PvP. And in order for us to make it an esport, we'd have to contribute quite a lot more of the development effort there.
Right. And my second question is, are there any plans to market Path of Exile in places like Korea or other parts of Asia?
We're trying to bring Path of Exile to as many countries as we can, and there are a few that we're actively working on. I expect that by the end of the year there'll be announcements about several more countries that don't speak English that currently don't have very good access to Path of Exile. And an area in particular that I'm very excited about is South America, for example. I don't think we have anything specific to announce there, but there's a lot going on. And the goal basically is to get people's servers in their country, to get them support for their language if they have difficulty with English, and basically let them play Path of Exile without the latency and foreignness that they currently get playing on our servers.
That's great news. Wow, that's unbelievable. Did you have anything else to ask him, Hedgie?
No, that was it. That was my last question. Thanks.
Chris, I must admit, you answered these questions like perfectly. I'm a little shocked. We didn't even catch you off guard.
That was really good answers.
Yeah, it's early in the morning here, so I'm not tired, and I haven't gone through a long work day yet.
Now, before we go into the live Q&A with our viewers, I want to say thanks a lot. I know you missed your morning meeting for this, and probably got everybody over there watching this anyways, don't you?
I'm not sure what's going on in the office. I'm sitting in my living room floor. I'm at home at the moment.
Alrighty. Well, this is the part where we're going to switch over to the viewers. Things we ask you guys to keep it not spoiler-oriented, but your questions more so about the current meta of the game, the do's and don'ts that you want of the game in its current state. All right, so if you want to kick this one off, Hedgie, you got any questions primed and ready to go?
Yeah, we got quite a few questions coming in, and keep them coming in. The first question is from Antony83. He says, I would really like to know how GGG intends to make the next league not seem an outright nerf to drop rates, seeing as how strong boxes will diminish in its frequency.
That is a very good question, and something that we've talked about a lot. And one of the things to note is strong boxes will be present as a permanent part of the game going forward. So while there will be slightly fewer of them, there will at least be, it shows that players do want kind of sources of free items that they run into occasionally and have the ability to influence with currency. So there will still be that, but having less of them, especially with regard to map drops, because we're tweaking that just a little bit. At the moment, it's really abusable how easily you can get very high-level maps from certain cartographers' boxes. But in the upcoming 4-month leagues, there are other new mechanics which both, to some extent, affect the at least ability to kill monsters, if not the ability to find items. So there will be other reasons why the players feel more powerful and or get more items in those leagues.
Oh, fair enough. I got a question here from Hapeless Goon. Are there any plans in the future regarding the Blood Magic Keystone? You know, a lot of people feel with auras. Auras almost are like a mandatory part of the game, but with the Blood Magic Keystone, you know, they feel like they can't really get that part of the game.
I haven't heard of anything being discussed, but I'm not always part of the Keystone discussion meetings nowadays. I'll bring it up with Carl and Rory. I'm actually making notes as we do the podcast so that I have a few topics that I can discuss with them. And honestly, if there's a good answer that we work out for these, I'll just throw it in the development manifesto or put it in the news. So if we have a good plan with Blood Magic in the very near future, you'll hopefully hear about it. Otherwise, we'll try to work out a good plan.
All right, so next question is from Papa Chulo. It says, when will the community get a practice mode for Descent Champions? But
that's interesting.
I've seen this asked quite a bit, like asking for practice Descent Champions, practice Endless Ledge.
So when we designed Path of Exile, we designed it to be replayable, and it took like 7 years. And when we made Descent Champions, it took like 2 weeks. And that's partly because Descent Champions isn't particularly replayable. And so we're kind of relying on the fact it runs infrequently to keep the smoke and mirrors up, you know, because if you can only play it every week or so, it's fun to play occasionally. But if you have the ability to just grind it repetitively, it isn't particularly a very long-living, rewarding game mode in itself, because, you know, it's relatively static and there isn't very much to it. And so to some extent, us keeping a practice mode away helps incentivize people to try it out when it is available. And if we throw a practice mode up, people would certainly get very, very good at Descent Champions, but they wouldn't necessarily enjoy it as much. Having said that, we are planning more Descent stuff in the near future, and there's discussion of Season 8 containing more Descent Champions than previous seasons have. So I expect you'll probably get a good opportunity to practice that one.
All I heard there was hype at the end. Oh, man.
Descent Champions.
Awesome.
The guys at the office will be listening to this and cringing.
They're going to get you when you go into work today.
All right, PKB Dank says, what do you think about items like the taming being taken out of new leagues? And I'll also throw in myself, like Headhunter. They were such a cool unique and a dynamic way to get an item by putting 3 rings together to make a really great unique. Will items like this ever be brought back to new leagues, even if they are race rewards?
So, while we turn off the league-specific uniques, as far as I'm aware, we haven't promised to keep them off forever. Like, I believe the way we worded it is that they're very unlikely to come back in the short term, but we have the ability to use them as race rewards and maybe turn them back on in the future, you know, as like best-of classic uniques kind of thing. So, to some extent, this is a little like Magic the Gathering, where they rotate things out, as it were, and you can still have those in your collection. Maybe you can't use them in the current competitive challenge leagues, but they are available for certain builds. And we quite like the dynamic. I mean, I understand there's some hate towards the general concept of overpowered legacy items, but in terms of stuff like Headhunter, where you can get it for a while, and then you can't get it anymore, and they exist in the economy for people to trade on standard, it creates a very nice dynamic that we like as Magic the Gathering players. And I think it's likely that the most popular of those uniques will probably return in the future in some challenge leagues, but we haven't got any specific plans on that yet.
Yeah, I personally, I kind of like it. It also rewards the player for playing the game at its current state, and it's just like a different kind of feel, you know, in the 4-month league, and it kind of, you know, incentivizes you to switch around and not just try to do the same build every 4-month league. So. Yeah.
There's also that some of those 4-month uniques tie directly into the mods in the league. For example, Headhunter was designed around Nemesis mods, and it gets worse when the rare monsters do less. And you're right, that encouraging people to play in the game's current state is always a good thing. I mean, we're trying really hard not to do cheap tricks like experience weekends and that kind of stuff. You know, just saying, hey, here's some free stuff for playing on the weekend diminishes the value of playing the game normally. But saying, look, here's some items you can only find at the moment is a much more appropriate way to do it.
You know, I must admit, Chris, that's one of the things I value most about your company. You're not about, like you said, cheap tricks, you know, those cheesy ways of bringing in people. You're all about the, you know, quality of quantity, and I appreciate that. Keep it up.
Thanks. We try very hard to do what we would want as players, and then hope that people will like it and continue to play. And, like, there are a lot of things we could do that would, you know, draw in double as many players in a few days if we wanted to start incentivizing stuff too much, but that's not good for the long-term health of the game. Those players would expect a similar level of incentives. And there are some games out there that really have to push quite large bonuses for play because the players are now used to those.
Mm. I got a question here from X-Man89. His question is a pretty good one. There are more and more guilds appearing now, with so many guilds already standing out and some created for casual play. Will there be any implementation for guild achievements or also increase the competitiveness between all guilds for bragging rights, distinguish high levels, achievements overall?
So when we were implementing the 1.00 release version of the game, one of the features that we intended to have in was guild challenges. And we actually came up with a set of challenges, just like the 8 that we had in Domination and Nemesis, designed for guilds. And we didn't get time to finish implementing them before release, and since then it hasn't been finished either. But we are like halfway towards the ability to have these high-level challenges, and they're just as hard as the current ones, if not harder. I mean, I can't remember the specifics, but an example would be to collect a very large set of uniques, and when the whole guild has to work together and have them in the guild stash, then it's certainly quite different than just trying to collect your own subset. And I believe the guild challenges included things like capture the flag and stuff. So in order to get the guild challenge, you'd have to put together a capture the flag team, you'd have to compete, you'd have to do well, and it could incentivize parts of the game that people don't currently play. We're interested in this, but it kind of depends on how much the community wants it. I mean, if people say, hey, that's kind of cool, but it's not a big deal, then we'll wait till we've got the right time to do it. But if it's a really, really, really important thing to the community, we can slip it in.
That's great.
All
And
right.
you mentioned the whole esports thing earlier, Chris. Obviously, that's a hard hill to climb. But this may be a good way to get that going too. Get the team rivalry and that PvP action going in the right direction. That's an awesome answer.
All right, next question is from Report Unskilled, and it is, are you happy about the percentage of people that killed Atziri, or at least attempted to kill her? Was this intended for all players, or strictly ones who could afford the time sink?
To some extent, so access to Atziri is bottlenecked on two things. It's bottlenecked on availability of fragments, and it's bottlenecked on player skill/items. And our intention was to scale one with the other. Early in the Sacrifice of the Val expansion, people didn't generally have enough items or experience to be able to kill Atziri, and so we dropped both. We spawned corrupted areas and dropped the midnight fragments at a relatively low rate. And with each major patch since then, we've monotonically increased the drop rate of the fragments. The idea is to simulate the fact that Atziri's corruption is taking over the world, and as players get more capable to kill her, they both have easier access to do it multiple times, and of course they have characters that are able to. And the goal is that towards the end of Sacrifice of the Val, running Atziri is a much more accessible thing than it was at the start. So it starts out really cool and people only get a chance to see her on YouTube and Twitch, and eventually, like, the top 50% of players get the ability to fight her relatively easily. And this is an experiment. People wanted, I guess, to use the D2 term, like, organ farming style stuff before, and there's been both good and bad feedback about this particular implementation of it, so there's a lot to learn for next time.
The next question comes from Butterknife, and I'll kind of tack on to this question too, but Butterknife asks, are there any plans for other endgame bosses like Atziri that are separate from the story progression? And for my general curiosity, do you guys plan on putting an endgame boss every expansion or every 4-month league?
So we will definitely introduce more bosses in the future, and an easy place to do this is unique maps, right? So there is something that you can kind of constrain access to slightly while still being cool, and that's something that we're very interested in doing. As for introducing something like Atziri, we've purposefully not designed the next expansion around there's some other villain that's terrorizing the world and you've got to go and stop him or her. And the reason here is A, it'll be a little bit more of the same, which isn't necessarily good, and B, it would have the same problem we were discussing with race rewards, where you don't want to just have a slope of having to do better and better each expansion of exactly the same thing. So we've designed something completely different for the next expansion. Like, no one's expecting it. It's crazy. And it's not farming fragments in order to fight another Atziri-style monster. But it is certainly something that people will enjoy, we hope.
All right, the next question by Earthen Lady. It says, how does the decision-making go on what skill is next to be introduced?
So this is something that has been improved a lot in the last year, and it's partly that in the past we used to say, let's think of some cool skills and make them, whereas now people like Rory and Carl will work out what does the game currently need the most and then design a skill to try to solve that. And for example, with Molten Strike, there was a lot of demand for another melee skill, so a melee skill was designed. And I don't think we've announced our next skill that's being introduced, but there was a specific type of build that people decided we need to provide more tools for this build. And so there's a patch that's centered mostly around that that's coming soon, like 1.14 or 1.15. And so nowadays, skill design is very much driven by what the game needs rather than what would be cool.
Ooh, that's an awesome teaser.
I mean, we of course try to make the skills cool as well, and the skills are definitely getting better, as you can see, compared to the oldest ones. I mean, we try hard to sweep things like elemental hit under the rug nowadays.
Oh man, please, that's my weak point right there.
Gaming Rendo asks, with some issues with the balance and difficulty, are there any plans regarding alpha members, feedback, and expanding the alpha member group to a previous to prevent serious balance issues in the future?
Alpha is a bit of a touchy subject, and we've had a lot of really good feedback from alpha members in the past, but the problem is if you keep the group relatively small and a tight community, and I mean, alpha members are not being paid, right? So we can't expect them to find all the problems in the game. And while their feedback is very useful, we just get far more success in terms of finding problems. Internal testing team that does this as a job and is super efficient at testing everything. And so as we scaled up our internal team, they were comparatively finding more stuff than alpha. And like, we really don't like having cheats on the alpha realm, so it makes it hard for people to actually go and test balance issues as well as our internal testers. So we decided, let's increase the size of the alpha community for leading up to release. The problem with doing this was that we started getting content leaked, and it was actually really hard to work out exactly who it was because there were a lot of people involved. And so we toned down the size of the alpha community again to just a really, really small group and haven't really been using it to its full potential. But the bright side is we do have plans for a much larger scale test of future content coming in the future. So we will be creating, as it were, beta servers again for certain content that more of the community gets to test, but we'll make sure to do it in a way so that their feedback is useful and so that leaks are controllable.
I like that. The next question here is from Victor Surge. How do you feel about the leech mechanics after the nerf? In particular, Mana Leech feels a bit over-nerfed at the moment. Would you guys at GGG consider buffering the recovery rate of Mana Leech?
I'm inclined to agree. To some extent, the leech changes were made mostly around Life Leech, and I've certainly got on my list to revisit Mana Leech and make sure that it's still potent. I think that the response to Leech was because it was really broken. Like, in its current state, you could basically be immortal using it, and in retrospect, the nerf may have been a slightly too large nerf, or maybe there was another way we could have approached it. I'm happy with what it achieved, but I'm not necessarily happy with the way it achieved it. So it's something we're discussing quite a lot, but we're very careful to not just go and change it to something else without substantial testing. And we did test this before we implemented it. It's just that players, like, when we introduce new 4-month leagues and we make large changes like that, the intention is not that people can take their old builds and just run with them necessarily. People do have to reevaluate what the game is like. It's like, for example, if in the next 4-month leagues we said you can't deal fire damage, right? Then people would have to come up with builds that don't do fire damage. Obviously, this isn't something we would do, but we kind of feel in some cases it's like someone's complaining that their fireball isn't doing damage, and we're saying, yes, these are the rules of the game. You know, in this case, Leech has been changed to be less effective,
right.
And I suspect we'll gradually creep it back up again later, but we tried to communicate it as a major experiment that we were doing with the introduction of these new 4-month leagues.
Yeah, I personally have fun, you know, trying to make what was once, you know, super powerful and trying to make it work again, and if not, just coming up with a different idea or trying to, you know, a different direction of using, you know, mana regen with a, you know, max mana, you know, being higher. The next question comes from Aerith. What do you think about the constant constant changes to the skill tree, whether they be buffs or nerfs? And she also says, or he, I enjoy coming back to the past characters, but sometimes the character is nerfed into the ground.
So we changed the skill tree to try to make it better, and in general it means buffing things. You know, you can see someone will say that the, you know, for example, the witch starting area might need attention, so we come along and we make it feel more powerful and impactful, and this generally means putting really good notables in there. So every few levels you get a spike of power that makes you feel really good, and this has been successful for other classes in the past. It's rare that we will actually directly nerf something on the tree, and that's often because it's really overpowered. Like the area of effect passives sat there for so long without people really building around increased area of effect. Buff durations or potency is another kind of thing which, like, it was in the tree for a while before it became popular, and then it was shown that when combined with good uniques, it was overpowered. These types of things we do have to nerf because the tree was just too generous with those, and I agree it's very frustrating if you come back and your character's been affected, and to some extent that's why every 4 months we give the, we set the flag on the characters that allows them to respec for free once. That way when someone returns with a little bit of research, they can rebuild the character.
Yeah, on a side note, should we be expecting like a character reset every 4 months, or how much do you guys determine is enough like percentage change in the passive tree to warrant a, character respec?
We generally give the button that says you can respec your character one time upon the 4-month leagues, regardless of whether there's been enough tree changes. And this is so that we both get the permanence of the tree within the 4 months, so people can't, experiment too quickly on characters or the drawbacks that you get with respecking. But it does mean that if they make a horrible mistake on their character, they can just wait for the new leagues and then have those points available again.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear.
Nice. All right, next question is by Black Janitor, and it says, is there any plan to introduce a high damage chaos damage main skill? What is the reason most of the chaos damage skills are very weak and hard to scale for late game?
I don't know the answers to that. Honestly, I have no idea. I'd have to ask Carl, so I'm sorry I can't help you there.
Go ahead and read the next question.
I got one. When it comes to invasion bosses, everybody's wondering what's going to happen with them. Are they going to go into the parent 4-month leagues? Are you guys happy overall with the invasion bosses? I personally love them. I'm a noob at this game, but I'll be first to say it was a great idea, great implementation. What do you guys feel about them?
Oh, I can answer this one because I put it in the manifesto silently a few weeks ago. Okay, so the answer is that we're using the best invasion bosses as static unique bosses for certain areas that didn't have them. So, for example, if there was an area of the game that didn't have a boss in it before, then we had the ability to pick one from the invasion pool. But the actual mechanic of having a random unique boss that doesn't necessarily belong in an area, we're not reintroducing to the 4-month game at the moment. This is partly because Rogue Exile's already solved that. And while it was cool in the Invasion League, it's not something we feel we don't need 2 levels of random bosses spawning at the moment, especially because the new 4-month leagues have their own cool stuff occurring.
Okay. You want me to read the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. DN Skull says, what do you think about evasion builds? Do you think they should receive a slight buff?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
It's about evasion builds, and it's asking do you think evasion builds should receive a slight buff?
So, evasion implicitly has the problem that it's a binary thing, right? You're either going to take full damage, or you're going to take none. And unless we were to implement a system of, say, glancing blows or something like that, which is kind of a stepwise function that approximates what armor does, then we have the problem that a string of hits on your character will be very dangerous, or a string of crits would be very dangerous. And so in the past we've done a lot of small things to try to improve evasion. Things like the introduction of acrobatics, and things like the entropy system that means that you don't get hit multiple times in a row, and the fact that you can evade reflected damage, and the fact that you get a second evasion roll on crits or some other mechanic that we introduced. There's a lot of things that we've added over time. And whenever we bring up evasion with the balance guys, they're of the opinion that it's actually quite a good defensive attribute now. And an example is the build of the week I did last week was primarily evasion, didn't have any problems with survivability. I mean, it was in invasion, very high level and hadn't died yet. So I don't think there's anything implicitly wrong with evasion as a defense mechanism, though it requires players to be very aware of the fact that they need to stop large incoming amounts of damage with whatever techniques they can do.
Okay, so it's more left up to the player to use their knowledge and skill to stay alive with evasion and how to build with it properly.
Yeah, if they get a lot of it, it will certainly help prevent much of the damage, but they have to understand it's going to be several all or nothings, if you see what I mean, right? Like sometimes they'll get a few hits in a row, which are quite large. If we were doing the armor systems of PoE again, they'd probably end up a little bit different. Evasion, I feel, works best when it's combined with something like armor, and it's interesting as well. If you are playing an evasion character, you have the option of turning it all into armor using the keystone, which is something that a lot of people choose to do.
I have a question, something correlated to evasion. I'm currently playing a dodge character, and the last patch notes specifically said dodge and spell dodge is now capped at 75%. I gotta know why, Chris. I gotta know why, because you can't even achieve it in the current state.
This must be because there's something changing in the future, and we want to get the nerf in before people find out that combo, right?
Fair enough. That's good enough for me.
And I don't know the answer either. I mean, I just took the change as an important one because Carl made it, and it's going in. So there must be a reason behind it.
The next question is from Oats PT. He says, Chris, is there going to be an official level 28 PvP bracket? Seeing as how like when you go to Sarn, you see those different levels of brackets. Like is there going to be a when the PvP tournaments do come out, is there going to be low level PvP? Is what they want to know.
Right, that's a good way of phrasing it. Because we picked 28 because it's a good level for PvP, and people have their level 28 characters and stuff. So we want to make sure that all those characters they've spent so long working on are actually usable in a real tournament. So I would be very surprised if there wasn't a level 28 bracket. But this could change. If we try to decide another level, it'll be for a good reason, though, because we understand people have a lot of characters and items optimized around level 28.
Okay, next question. Scrody McBee says, with strong boxes becoming a permanent part of the game, will chests and barrels become less prominent part of the game? Become a less prominent part of the game?
I mean, the strongbox rate won't be as high as it currently is, but there's certainly a big design push internally to review what chests we use in the game, especially with strongboxes being permanent. And in the initial version of the design of strongboxes, you could actually use currency on any type of chest in the game. Like in the initial pass, you could walk up to a barrel and alch it if you wanted to, but it became apparent that you needed some way of limiting the number of things that you could apply currency to. So that's why we introduced strongboxes as a standalone thing that you can use currency on, and that helped a lot so that you didn't spend all your time using alterations on every barrel or chest that you ran into.
Yeah.
The next question is from Dr. Frostbite. Can you elaborate on the way that 6-linking is being changed, as it was revealed on the Reddit post that it was, something was coming? More specifically, how will it be easier to work towards a 6-link?
So I was careful with my phrasing there, and I can't really answer the question because it pertains to the upcoming expansion. But one of the things that we're addressing in the expansion is a few other ways to influence the crafting of your items. And this is partly in response to the fact that 6-linking, we want to make it easier in some ways without directly just making it numerically easier to roll, because that's kind of unfair on the people that have already rolled their 6-links. But at the same time, we'd like it so players have access to more sockets, and especially linked sockets. So in response to a lot of feedback about crafting, there are some systems coming that we're still working on heavily, of course, but they make up a core part of the upcoming expansion, and we can't really talk about it in any more detail. I would expect at least 5 weeks before you find out any more information on it, but there's certainly some stuff coming there in response to feedback about crafting.
All right, the next question is from Riths, and it's asking, are signature races going to always be fixed in the future, or will we see any kind of different signature race?
In the same way that I've mentioned with our design of race rewards and expansions and stuff, we don't want to just repeat the same thing too many times. So my understanding is that the signature race in Season 8 is not a fixed seed one. I'm not directly involved in the race season design, so I could be wrong and they might have changed their mind by now, but the goal is to vary it up a bit, especially to try new and interesting things with that.
Okay, cool.
I got a question here from Zesta. We'll just say that because the rest is hard to read. One thing I was really disappointed about was no corruption zones in maps. Having to farm low levels has really turned me off from its theory. Are there any thoughts of eventually adding those into maps? That's a good question.
So the goal here is that we wanted there to be several things that players could be doing to access the end game, and the intention was that there were 3 direct things competing with each other. You could be playing in maps, you could be doing Piety, Dominus, Merveil, whatever runs, or you could be looking for corrupted areas so that you have access to Atzeri. And we kind of felt that if we put corrupted areas in maps, then people would be achieving 2 of these at the same time. They'd be playing maps while also getting access to fight Atzeri occasionally, and we wanted players to have to choose which specific thing they were going for. Some people greatly favor farming maps and not caring about it Zeri, and others are good at doing it Zeri, and that way people have specializations of what they choose to spend their time on, and once you get sick of one thing, you can try the other. And this may or may not have worked, depending on a lot of people's opinions. We'll definitely be experimenting with other ways to tie the end games together in the future.
The next question is from Old School. Question about the new microtransaction art. Is there a defined line in the art that you guys hold on to determine which microtransaction is suitable or not? For example, in your honest opinion, Chris, do you consider the art of the new Seraph wings following in line?
So our art direction is laid out by Eric, who's our creative director, and he's been on the project since day one, one of the founders, and he's been very consistent with his art style in terms of our concept drawings. It's just that the players haven't necessarily seen some of the pieces like the wings until recently, but that kind of thing has been in the plan for microtransactions over time, and there's a reason why we don't introduce it right on day one, partly because wings are incredibly difficult to create. I mean, they took a lot of effort to make those ones, and we kind of want to meter the microtransactions out over time, and especially with regard to art, for microtransactions, they don't feel out of place to us, and this is partly because we've been looking at pictures of this kind of stuff for a long time. We see it as, well, that's what the cool microtransactions look like, and I completely trust Eric's decisions on what he wants things to look like in the game. I mean, there's plenty of grimy, gritty stuff coming up, right? There's some really twisted things coming, and honestly, in the context of the Seraph set that the wings are meant to go with, they're not completely out of place. I mean, it does have a lot of other yellow fins that look similar on it, and I understand when we initially posted it's interesting because I initially posted a screenshot of the wings on a character with a full Seraph set, and I didn't see very many complaints about the wings. When we put our microtransaction video on the YouTube channel, it just had the wings and no other items of the set. And this was done, of course, because we were only selling the wings in that video, so we didn't want to communicate that we were selling the rest of the set at the same time. The wings by themselves, especially on a level 1 character, do look very out of place, and this caused quite a lot of negative reaction. And then when people actually see them in the game, frequently on characters with the Seraph set, they're more understanding, at least as far as we've seen from feedback. They're more understanding about the fact that they go in the context of this heavily armored, very yellow and metallic character.
Alright, the next question is the Subsonic. Are there any plans to introduce more endgame maps, specifically 77, 78 plus maps, as some people strictly farm these maps very late game?
I'd like to. To some extent, the reason why the maps are laid out in a pyramid of more low-level ones and less high-level ones is that people aren't supposed to have access to high-level ones as often as they currently do, but we'll definitely have to introduce some more over time so that there's more variety in the end ones. Though, having said that, despite the top players farming the top maps, like, the bulk of maps that are run are very low-level ones. I mean, like, we heard a stat recently saying no one would run a 66 map. But yeah, a quarter of maps that are run are 66 maps, according to the stats at the time. So the budget of map tile sets has gone towards the ones that people are playing quite a lot, even though the strong boxes drop very generous high-level maps at the moment.
Okay. I have a question here. This is a really cool question. This one's from Hochep. He specifically words, are there any plans to change shield charge or add a shield type bash ability? I don't know if we need to change shield charge, but definitely I would like to see some more shield type moves. You know, and in specific, he has a shield ability that scales off of your evasion, armor, ES, or block would be a great addition to the game. How do you feel about this?
I definitely think that it would be very cool, and there's at least one team member at the moment that's pushing for shield abilities quite heavily. So I expect you'll probably see some in the future. We don't currently have any in development that are very far along, but it's definitely something that within a year you may see.
I have a question. This one's actually from me. Are there any or designs of adding a support gem that would reduce the souls required for Vol gems? Or do you guys just feel like it's more appropriate just to outright reduce them or balance them on the specific gem itself?
To some extent, we're still gathering data about the usage of some of them. I mean, there's a lot of discussion internally about how much they should cost, and I expect you'll see some tweaks to individual ones. We are relatively pleased with where the Val gems are to some extent, that they're used at about the right level. We're not seeing too many builds that go completely overboard with Val gems, and at the same time, they are still used. A lot of characters have at least one, so it's it doesn't need emergency changing, and it gives us time to actually collect a lot of data before we make a decision.
All right, next question is from Joe Rab. As a casual player, I really liked to encounter corrupted areas. Are there going to be more of this low-level casual accessible content in the future?
Yeah, so that's a good point. The upcoming content we're working on is very accessible, and to some extent, like when we were doing our internal postmortems of Sacrifice of the Val, the stuff that went well was very much the stuff for high-level players, like item corruption and stuff that's interesting in terms of end-game item things. And the problem with corrupted areas for low-level players is that you're finding fragments towards something that's going to be a very, very, very long time before you actually get to face, right? The fragments to fight at Zeri are only useful once you get right to the end of the game, and quite a lot of people that just want to play through normal difficulty aren't really getting a chance to face at Zeri. So we're very careful with future content design to make sure that the awesomeness starts as early as towards the end of normal difficulty, for example.
Nice.
Next question is from Marcus. He says, will we be getting a quality of life development manifesto like you said that might happen? It would be good to know when some of the things the players have been so desperately wanting to come in and why they can't come in if,
well,
there's
thankfully
a reason.
most of them probably can, given development time. We have a half-finished development manifesto post about the quality of life stuff. I want to update the manifesto more this week. There's just an awful lot going on in the next couple of days with the announcement that we'll be making later today. And I definitely think that the quality of life features is a really good topic for it, because a lot of them boil down to, yes, we will do this, it's just a matter of getting time, and here's the reason why it's lower priority than blah. And some of the stuff boils down to, actually, this is surprisingly difficult. Like, for example, the common request to not lose lines of chat when you're changing areas isn't just a quick fix. Because, of course, the chat has nowhere to go while the player's not connected to either server, so we'd have to do something much more complicated to store it. And it's those type of things that are, several entire days of development time from a few people to fix. At the moment, that's quite a large commitment, considering other stuff we're working on.
All right, next question is from SETI12, and it says, will there be any more chances to create a unique item or monster for the game in the future?
I'd hope so. The reason that we disabled the ability for people to purchase those is because we had so many in the queue, and it would be unfair for someone to buy it and then have to wait like a year for them to actually get started. So we're trying to get through the queue that we have before we start selling too many more. However, if you are really patient and want to get in the queue, feel free to contact us and we can work something out. It's just that we want to make sure that someone doing that understands that there's quite a lot of people who have been patiently waiting behind them.
Findel asks, how do you feel about Blood Rage nearly giving you up to 100% increased attack speed on low life with the proper supports? Do you feel like this is too powerful, and is Blood Rage going to get looked at again?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I haven't been involved with exact skill balance for a little while, so while people have been talking about Blood Rage, I don't know what the actual opinion of Carl and Rory is on that. I'll put it on the list so that it can get looked at. So if you didn't want it fixed, then it may be.
The next question I'm sure you're going to like. Mezzofortissimo, as a fellow MTG player, Magic the Gathering, I love the 4-month league idea. What are some ideas you guys are throwing around that you have derived from Magic the Gathering?
Oh, that's a good question. We've tried a lot of interesting stuff. So back in 2011, I think, we held some Path of Exile drafts that were kind of fun, where you have a command that gives you a pile of items like a booster draft, and you get to select them and have players then compete in PvP. That was interesting. There were certainly some balance repercussions of that, and it was more an experiment than an actual intended feature, but it's amazing how applicable anything from Magic the Gathering is towards Path of Exile. So yeah, there's some really cool stuff that you can get inspiration from there.
So you're saying you're going to make a boss named the Polar Kraken? I'm kidding.
Nice.
Okay, this Ficken site, the intricacies of the metagame currently keeps giving everyone that I try to introduce to Poe the wrong idea of the game, wrong idea of what the game is about, and effectively keeps them from playing. What are your thoughts on this, and are there any plans in the future to improve this?
So we don't want to ever remove any intricacies of the metagame, right? I mean, we can start making the game really accessible to new players by dumbing it down, but that's not really going to help everyone, right? So we have to keep the game complicated, but we have to find a way to introduce players to this complexity. And to some extent, that's why we're bringing back Build of the Week series. There should be another one going up tomorrow. And we're trying to both have a mixture of complicated, intricate builds that are inspirational, but also builds that are relatively easier, that are good for new players. For example, the build that I'll be showing off in this week's Build of the Week is designed for the 2-week race that's coming up, and the goal is that a new player could just follow the recipe and have a relatively good character. And while we'd love to have people designing their own builds, certainly fine to copy someone else's until you know enough about the game.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely plays for a much more rewarding experience when like you have to put in the time to earn it, or like take the time to understand something on how it functions, or like to put a proper build together.
Yeah, and it's meant to.
I do like that because, you know, as a new player, you click that little plus sign because you didn't even know piece of hotkey yet, and you just see this gigantic map. The Build of the Week is a great incentive to get new players in there, so props.
These were 2 questions that were asked. I didn't catch which who asked them, but one of them is regarding will there be any more supporter packs in the near future, and number 2 was are there any plans to bring back the create your own unique or monster?
So the second part of it, we'd answered that we probably will in the future, but for the time being, we're not, because the queue is really long. With regard to supporter packs, we're definitely bringing more out in the future. We're just trying to make sure to not bring them out too fast. I mean, for example, people were asking for Sacrifice of the Val supporter packs, but by that point, it had only been like 10 weeks since the last set, and we didn't particularly want to ask people for their money that often because they've been very generous as it is. And we really don't want to get people to feel they're missing out on supporter packs because we're piling them out as fast as we can. We will be introducing more. I don't have a clear timeline of when, but the current ones have at least several weeks more availability left, if not a lot longer.
Next question is from Bambucha. You are adding more and more content every 4-month leagues, but what will happen in a few years? Will there eventually be too much content, like strong boxes, shrines, like rogue exiles? Will you remove features once they become old?
So we're happy with the idea of phasing things out and bringing them back in later. Like, that's something that we enjoy from Magic the Gathering. However, the stuff that we're adding is stuff that we feel the game needs to make it interesting. Like, I mean, when you play, for example, Diablo 3, lots of cool stuff happens in Act 1, right? You have all these neat events and cool things that you run into and encounters, and while there's a lot about that game that I don't like, I do like the fact that the environment feels very immersive as you encounter these bits and pieces that spawn randomly. And that's something we're going for in Path of Exile post-release, where you encounter things like strongboxes and shrines and exiles and the new 4-month league stuff that we can't talk about yet. And we'd rather have a lot of interesting stuff that can happen rarely so you never know what to expect, rather than a game where there's only 2 features active at a time.
The next question is from Mezzo Fortissimo again. Throw a little Italian on that. But this is a good question. Can we expect to see grinding gear games at PAX Prime or maybe in any future conventions at all?
We may be able to make it to some conventions. Because we're a small team, it requires a massive amount of effort to go to an overseas convention. Like, it requires taking quite a lot of the development staff. It requires planning a booth, and the people planning the booth are people like me and our marketing guy Jeremy, and people like that who really should be working on other things, you know, on its direction. So while it's a lot of fun to do PAX Prime, and we have done that convention before in 2011, it's so much work, and it really would have a big impact on the amount of game created that year. So we want to make sure we make smart decisions with what to spend our time on. And while it's very cool to meet fans and stuff, we try to have fan meetups whenever we are in a foreign city doing any kind of promotion, so you could treat it kind of like a mini PAX.
All right, next question. This has been asked a few times in chat, and it's about races and movement speed. Has there ever been a discussion of introducing a quest reward or like some way that guarantees movement speed boots early in a race, or maybe like the implicit movement speed boots from Descent Champions?
So the first thing we did there was to put the Quicksilver Flask recipe in specifically for racing, but to do it, sorry, by recipe I mean quest reward, to put it in so that players had to choose whether to get it or not, right? We'd rather do that than just give it to them for free. And the second thing we did is there's a vendor recipe that enables you to craft movement speed onto your boots. I think that consumes a Quicksilver Flask in the process. So this means you now have the choice between getting the flask to use, getting the flask to put it on your boots, or not getting it at all. But you can use subsequent Quicksilver flasks to do that recipe if needed. And we're trying, where possible, to create movement speed through decisions rather than just giving it to people for free.
Okay, that's understandable. Leave it up to like decision making and experience on when to craft it or keep the Quicksilver.
Right, and this is also like putting an armor or shield on or not, right? At the moment you run faster if you don't have those on, and so that's another decision that players can make.
Alright, good answer. I like that.
Now, Chris, we're coming to an end on all this, and we got about 5 minutes left before this is all said and done. If you had, you have anything you want to say out to the community or the viewers that, you know, your dev team was like, hey, you know, you can go ahead and give this out, but that's it. Any spoilers that you got the green light on?
We have an announcement coming up later today that we'll be writing up, which is about the 2-week race that we're doing. And this one's a bit of a special one, really. And I can probably talk about it, you know, this being a few hours before the announcement. But essentially, it's between Season 7 and 8, right in the middle of the current 4-month leagues. And it's a 2-week race that has the properties of both ambush and invasion. And this is the new, like, rebalance invasion that we introduced in 1.1.3, where the bosses are a little bit less unfair. And the 2-week race is special because we actually have some interesting industry partners helping us and a charity connection as well. And we'll be announcing more details about that later today. But you can actually win quite a lot of cool prizes. Like, we've got graphics cards and gaming hardware and stuff like that up for grabs. So I definitely encourage you to bring your friends and get them playing. And that's why we're releasing a build of the week to go with it, which encourages a relatively powerful but simple build that uses a newly introduced skill. It's a Molten Strike build. So basically you can say to your friends, look, if you're struggling to work out what to play, just play that build and I'll help you with the details, and then have a good time playing the event with them, and hopefully you win like a graphics card and something like that.
Oh my goodness. Chat's crazy.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Willie,
so we've also pitched the prizes at really low level as well. I think you're eligible to win any of the hardware stuff by getting to just level 35 in the race, so new players should really find it easy to. But we're also putting some exclusive stuff for high-level players as well.
with that question, I would like to ask also, Willie wants to know, are we looking at a pretty like soon timeline for longer cutthroat races?
I'm not sure what the timeline is. I have to talk to the guys at work.
Okay.
But I'll try to get it in.
All right, with closing statements, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Chris. If you had to say one thing to the entire Path of Exile community that's not about Path of Exile, what would it be?
Oh, that's tough.
If not, it's all right.
I don't know.
Keep dying.
Yeah, okay, well, I can't... No, I mean, I want to say a lot about Path of Exile because it's such a good community, but I'll just cop out and say that regardless of the Path of Exile connection, I really enjoy talking with everyone in the community and like reading everyone's mail and chatting with them, whether it's about the game or not. So, yeah, I really appreciate your friendship, guys.
There we go. That's freaking awesome. All right, Chris. Now that we're in closing, in case you guys were wondering, this is the lead developer, Chris Wilson of Grinding Gear Games. Him and another group of people, they love the Diablo 2 experience so much, they love Magic Gathering so much, they made this awesome free-to-play game that you guys can download on pathofexile.com or through Steam, and hours of endless fun, tons of builds that you can make, and I mean, the novelty is always there. It's always new and exciting.
Yeah, it's so much fun. It's been known to almost cause heart attacks.
Nice.
All right, well, I think that's about it. I mean, you have anything else you want to say, Chris, before we head out?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks very much for your time, guys. I really enjoyed being on the podcast this week.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time. We know it's valuable, and your contribution is just amazing. I'm looking forward to all the stuff that you have planned in the future.
Thanks, we are as well.
All right, so we're going to log off right now. We're going to go into a 10-minute intermission. We still have another hour left of the podcast where Hedgie, Terry, and myself, we're going to talk about different issues or awesome things about Path of Exile, so stay tuned. We'll be back in approximately 10 minutes. Thanks again, Chris, for tuning in. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming on and talking to us, answering some questions.
That's not a problem.
Tell me when we're good. All right, everybody. So we're in the second part. Hopefully, had you put on the 3-person, I can't see. But we're in the second part of our podcast now. During this part, we're going to be discussing we each have 3 segments each. I'll be discussing self-casting. Hedgie's going to be discussing, trading, the trends in trading throughout the past 4-month leagues. And Terry's going to be talking about Powerhouse and maybe some builds that need some love in raising. Before we get going, let's do a little introduction. In case you guys didn't know, my name is Ian, or Zeno for short. I'm currently talking in my car because my power is out. I know you can all laugh at me. But, if there's a will, there's a way. That's pretty much all I got to say about me. Terry, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Hey everyone, Terry here. I'm known for being a dedicated racer and helping introduce new players into the racing scene, helping out, sharing all my knowledge and race knowledge in Path of Exile. Aside from that, I just put most of my time into streaming, and I just love Path of Exile, sharing as much as I can and getting more people into this amazing game.
Hey everybody, it's Hegemony, and I've been playing this game since February of last year. I've been playing pretty actively in every single league. I haven't really been playing many other games. This is the game that's made me quit playing World of Warcraft, and I love it. I love everything about it, and I love the community behind it, and all you guys coming out to listen to us. Thank you guys very much.
Okay, let's kick this off. So, Terry, I want to hear your ins and outs. I want to hear this powerhouse build, or these underrated or need some love builds in racing. What do we got for you today?
I'm going to start off, and I'm going to be talking about bows in races. And bows right now are one of the underused, more weaker skills and setups to use. The classes that can support bow skills currently, they generally have better options. Like, for example, Duelist and Ranger. Ranger Spectral Throw is probably the most viable for normal races and the most effective. Duelist mostly favors going Leap Slam. And you can go Shadow Spectral Throw, but given Flame Blast, Glacial Cascade, just bow skills, they get put down on the list. They're near the bottom. Bows at lower level, on most cases, they have less DPS than one-handed weapons, one-handed axes, and less than half the amount of DPS than two-handed weapons. But there are other factors. It's not just about the weapon display DPS or your total damage from your weapon and maybe jewelry. But aside from that, the other factors, your average on damage using a bow will be probably half the clear speed, just from the functionality of, say, split arrow from the start, or once you get rain of arrows. But for comparing bows, sorry, what's up? I thought I heard something. Alright, so comparing bows to two-handed weapons have 4 base types. You got axes, swords, staffs, and maces. And bows, there's only just bows. They appear every 5 levels until level 20, and then after level 20, they're every 4 levels, but until about level 35, you won't really see bows after that level unless you're doing a long race, a 3-hour race. But on most cases, you do not see those weapons. But so there's a lot more itemizing going to two-handed weapons, and there's 1 bow every 5 levels on average in races. And what makes bows a lot harder to itemize is there's 4 times the amount of bases for two-handeds, and that's a lot more two-handed weapons that are going to be dropping. And if you don't get your appropriate bow, when you hit the level required, your damage it's going to start falling off, and it's going to fall off fast. So your first difficulty is obtaining the bow, and then the second is you need your bonus damage to actually be up to pace clearing.
Now, I got a question for you. Do you think that maybe I hate to say this, but the implementation of maybe a two-handed crossbow or a one-handed hand crossbow might be able to, help out, because there's so many bow skills dedicated on that right side of the tree? Do you think maybe adding more than just here's a two-handed bow, good luck with it? You think that's a good idea? I
think that is definitely a really good idea, because that will, one, it will allow you to look for more bows that drop as you progress through the race. And 2, you can maybe adjust the stats on the weapon to maybe be a bit more favorable for lower level and then start to fall off. So it could be more directly made for racing or lower level bow skills. So I think that's a really good idea. Like a two-handed, harder hitting like crossbow or something might be equivalent to like say a low-level two-handed sword.
Do you
Just
I have a question. Do you feel like the damage needs to come up a notch too, along with the frequency at which, the types that drop?
I think yes, frequency of bows dropping, it definitely needs to be a bit up there more because like when you're picking up two-handed weapons as opposed to looking for bows, you're gonna like on average get 4 times the amount of two-handed weapons. And if you're restricted to using like a crude bow at a level 7, that's like right there, that's extra minutes that you're taking to clear monsters. Whereas if like a bow dropped for the appropriate level, you would maybe be like 1 or 2 areas up ahead just from killing quicker. So it's all about your clear pace. And if your damage is holding you back or not being able to itemize properly at the appropriate time in the race, you're really going to start to fall behind. So it's just not easy to itemize bows at low level.
Is it one of those things where it like just starts out real slow and then like starts to ramp up or starts to start gaining its efficiency, or is it just slow all the way around?
I would say it starts to pick up maybe mid Act 2. So like around level 15 you get, I think it's the composite bow. That's when both like the slow pace and the slow clear will start to pick up, like using your rain of arrows, or once you get lightning arrow. And like lightning arrow is strong. It'll be really good once you can use it in a race with LMP. But if you're going bows early in a race, by the time you get to that stage and you have your lightning arrow with lesser multiple projectile, you're going to be probably like more than 5-7 minutes behind, say, a ranger that is two-handed spectral throw or a leap slam duelist. And that's just because of the raw damage output and the functionality of low-level split arrow or rain of arrows.
No, you keep talking AoE abilities. Isn't the biggest problem with bows is like lack of single target? Like in a race, frenzy tilt 19, I guess you're stuck using burning arrow. But I mean, I don't know. I think bows are overall just need some love in the single target department. Obviously, the AoE clear speed of Roa is okay, but again, that goes to rolling a bow properly. And when you roll a bow with like the rustic sash magic recipe, it's the same damn attack as a white wood splitter, and that is a huge problem.
Yeah, how much do you think it would have to increase by in order to be competitive, with your spectral throwers?
I would say 20 to 30% of a base increase, and then another thing about bows is that you need a quiver. If you don't have a quiver drop, like within say the first 5 minutes or like the first few areas of a race, that's a large portion of your damage gone, and you don't always get that quiver. It's not cheap to get a quiver from the vendor. I think it's a transmute to get a quiver early on from a vendor. And like that right there, you want to either transmute like your rustic sash for your weapon recipe or use it to get an amulet that you need stats for. So right there, you're torn in between, I need my quiver for more damage, or like I need my amulet so I can have enough strength to use this, or like whatever amulet you may need.
So let me ask you this, like in the current state of racing, if you picked up a quiver off a hillock, are you ahead or behind, in your next 10 levels?
I would say if you start off on split arrow and you have a crude bow, just like any quiver and double iron ring, that will maybe put you at the same clear pace of just a corroded blade and spectral throw with no other bonus damage.
Wow.
And like that right there, the itemizing difference, like one needs almost, well, you need your 2 rings and a quiver, and you can only really get 1 ring unless you meal at the start of a race or if it drops off hillock. And like if you don't get that quiver, there's say like a quarter of your damage or a third of your damage gone. And in comparing like the DPS and the damage effectiveness on spectral throw, it starts off below 50%. So I think it's 46%, around there. And when you have a two-hander spectral throw, your display DPS is a little bit low, but everybody knows like the functionality of spectral throw where you attack and it sits in the idle dead zone for like a second or two and then it comes back. This makes up for the display DPS. It performs much better because like 1, you can attack and run and it sits in the idle zone, keeps hitting monsters, and 2, it's going to hit every 0.3 seconds, and that's a lot of damage coming out. So even with a really low damage effectiveness, just from functionality, like Spectral Throw will outperform even at doing half your weapon damage. It's better than using like Split Arrow from the start, and that right there, it's like, no, you're not losing any damage using Split Arrow or like a crude bow, but you're using half your damage to another attack, and it's still gonna be like twice as fast as clearing.
Not only that, but Chris just confirmed that,
Yeah.
maybe in the future we'll see more Spectral Throw. It's not intended to be muled. They want it, maybe the Dex classes will have easier access to it.
Yeah.
That's just more of a reason that we need a buff.
It'd be nice because like casters have been getting a lot of love in the in summoners and just recently Molten Strike. It'd be nice to see an arrow type that would fit into the racing scene and the early game to give him just make him a little bit more competitive.
Yeah, exactly. And like you talked about bow skills earlier, Zeno, and for single target there's like Burning Arrow. You can use Ice Shot, but everybody basically uses that for AoE. Not Burning Arrow, but like say Ice Shot, Lightning Arrow. And Frenzy, it's not even a bow specific single target skill. You can use it with one-handers too. So I really think that like bows need a more like single target like focused ability. Maybe something that when you hit a monster multiple times you get like a slight buff, or it does some like impact to the monster hitting it repeatedly. Just like an idea for a single target attack. But I compared a crafted composite bow, or I compared a composite bow, the level 15 bow, to a wood splitter, which is the level 13 axe. And with no other damage gear, the bow has 33 DPS, which is about 30% less displayed than the wood splitter. And this, like, it's all about the top end damage and the raw base damage. You have your weapon recipe with the higher base damage on the axe. It's just going to scale that much higher and do that much more damage, as opposed to like this bow that's dealing 30% less base damage. It's just going to scale nowhere near as high from the weapon recipe. And almost everybody that is using an attacker based build in a race is using like this recipe 1 to 3 times or more in a race, depending on the race and like what weapons you need to craft. But sorry, go ahead.
Part of your discussion was powerhouse builds too.
Yeah.
And now the Molten Strike you can get at level 1, is this going to be used in race? That's what I don't know. Will this change the whole Leap Slam meta? Is this going to help out racing at all?
I think Molten Strike will maybe give Cleave a bit of competition. Cleave, I feel like it does need some love early in races, but like it's your kind of go-to skill to get from point A to point B to transition to Leap Slam. But for Molten Strike, it performs very well, and it has a high like kill speed early on. And the thing though about Molten Strike is it doesn't have a lot of range. So if you can get clumped up monsters in front of you, they're just going to die in like 1 or 2 attacks. Maybe on like Molten Strike might be a good single target ability in a race. Like if you want to focus on a rare guy, kill the monsters around him, and like still do significant damage to the rare monster. It might be a bit situational, but I really think it can compete with Cleave. Like it might be a Cleave replacer. It's definitely good. The damage is there, the functionality and the output is there. It's just you can't kill and kite as good, like compared to say Spectral Throw. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a lot better for kiting with Molten Strike than Cleave. Like having that delay is really nice.
Definitely. You can attack, take a couple steps, maybe wait for like the monsters to run up behind you, and like attack again.
Still shift click too. That's the thing. You shift click Molten Strike and then move if you have to. So the projectiles are coming out as you're moving.
It's really good that you can.
Last patch we had, what was it, Glacial Cascade, and obviously more and more you see more Flame Blast in races. Casters before, I mean, actually casters were good in early game races, back in the earlier seasons. Then they kind of disappeared. Now they're coming back. How do you feel casters are? Are they stronger than your Spectral Throw? Are they stronger than your Leap Slammers?
I think like the most powerful builds, like the top 2 powerful builds right now would probably be Ice Nova, Fire Trap, and Flame Blast, and that probably competes with Leap Slam. And what makes those 3 spells, Fire Trap, Ice Nova, Flame Blast, so strong is once you get Flame Blast, that's your go-to skill for most magic packs and usually rare monsters or bosses, because it's like a one-use skill and they're most likely going to die on your first charge. For Ice Nova and Fire Trap, you rotate these abilities progressively through the race, depending on the monster resistances. You can open up, like throw your Fire Traps ahead of you, use one Ice Nova, and generally the pack will be dead. And these two skills, like for clearing white packs, are very, very effective. They kill like super fast. And then like you have your Flame Blast, which is your boss killer. You can also use Glacial Cascade, and Glacial Cascade is very strong for how easy it is to use and its functionality. Like it will freeze and shatter, chill. Like when you hit a monster, if it does enough damage, you will stun them from the physical damage. So I highly recommend for anybody that is looking for like a more friendlier race build to maybe try out Glacial Cascade. It is very effective. Like my girlfriend uses it on a Templar, and she's got like top 10 Templar multiple times.
Is there any point where it like teeters off, where like you switch to a different skill because the damage effectiveness is inferior to something else? Like, I don't know, after like level 30 or something, does it still feel really solid?
I think as long as you have your weapon crafted, like your wand or mace, whatever you use, with 1 to cold gems, and you have your added lightning damage linked to it, or like some type of added damage, the fall off, it might start to fall off like around docks, but I honestly think the display DPS and like the performance of it will be better than like Spectral Throw once you get to that point. Wow. So you will be able to farm effectively and at a good pace for basically races where you get to docks, and that's basically most of the progression. I'm going to just talk about quickly when are both skills used and what makes them used there. And one of them is Descent and Descent Champions, because this is the Ranger's only option. But what makes them a lot more effective in these situations is monsters in these races, they are funneled to you in a lot of the cases. When you're progressing through the game normally, a lot of the time monsters, there's like 3 monsters to your left, 2 to your right, and they're kind of spread, so you have to take like the extra time to line them up better, or nearly like double your attacks to hit them both. But on these races in particular, monsters will like rush you, they'll rush your face and stand on top of you. And this works very well with point blank Roa in Endless Ledge, Descent, and Descent Champions. You get the more damage for up close hits, and that's like having the monsters in these tighter closed in areas, that makes it a lot better for like those races. So having the bonus damage from point blank and just the layouts in difference like to a normal race, that makes bows able to clear more effectively there, because monsters are less spread, less attacks to hit monsters all over the place.
So you're saying it's advantageous to use something like Roa versus Split?
Yeah, I think you can use both like together, where Split Arrow will hit monsters like obviously spread apart better. Roa, it's more clumped up and like it's a concentrated like circle wherever you hit. Right. If you use both, it'll probably they'll synergize well to where Split Arrow will hit monsters to the sides, as Roa is kind of like in that one patch. So you definitely want to hang on to both, but I really think Roa will kill a bit quicker. Mm-hmm. And in party races, you might see people using bows, because early on when their damage is a bit weak, they can get carried by party damage. So they might not be contributing as much or doing as much damage as other people in the party. But once you get, say, mid-Act 2, you're level 19 and you have Lightning Arrow, Lesser Multiple Projectile, that's where your output will basically like more than double, in my opinion. That's when you'll start to like 1-shot, 2-shot packs with Lightning Arrow. Like Lightning Arrow LMP, you're basically hitting up to 9 targets per shot from hitting nearby monsters. So that, like, if you can get carried in a party, you can use bows more effectively and effectively farm. But if you were solo, and like I said earlier, somebody is Spectral Throw or a different build, and you get to that point without being in a party, you're going to be like 5-7 more minutes behind.
Yeah, so what you were saying earlier, it's like bow build can be effective, but it sounds like because you're adding these extra party members, they're increasing the quantity at which bows drop, and basically able to feed you all the quivers. Your chances of, from your group mates makes you more a competitive race contender. But doing
Yeah,
it on your
exactly.
own is just, you know, you're just praying to the loot gods that something drops for you.
It's almost punishment
So
going solo.
yeah, it almost sounds like it's not too bad because, like you said, you know, it starts to pump the nos once you get to that, you know, lightning arrow phase, and you start to really shine. But you need, it's just such a like an extensive struggle to get to that point, and there's no like real smooth transition.
Yeah,
I like that.
exactly. That's where bows need the most love, is getting to that stage to where you can like clear and farm as effectively as the other competitive racing builds. And, like I had some ideas to make bows a bit more usable and viable. Or somebody gonna say something?
But you're about 21 minutes in. Just a heads up.
All right. So, or do you want to go to?
No, just
your
okay,
segment?
just sum it up. Go
finish it
ahead.
up.
Yeah.
So I just had a few ideas to make bows a bit more usable, and one of them is to have a low-level quiver recipe that might be like a race-specific quiver, or like just a decent quiver that can guarantee you that item, like to use it in a race, and maybe like 2 wisdom scrolls, a skill gem. Like to the vendor, you get a quiver that can help you get that extra damage that you need early on.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe introduce like bows more often, or like Zeno said earlier, a crossbow or a one-handed like crossbow, two-handed crossbow. Just allow more easier access to the things you need early on in a race.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it'll add, you know, some of the flavor if you're able to get these early access items with these simple recipes. That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Now that you've heard the powerhouses, you know, Flame Blast, Fire Trap still happening, Ice Nova still happening, and you also heard about the weaker things. I don't know if you heard the word bow in the past 20 minutes, but that would be. So we're going to get on to my segment now, and my segment is, it's a love-hate segment with self-casting. During my segment, I'm going to be discussing ways to make it more interesting and reward the person for going self-casting, but at the same time punish all other forms of casting. And also I want to talk about builds that, you know what, despite the hate for self-casting right now, they still happen, they still exist, and they're still fun. We'll kick it off with that one. Incinerate. Incinerate is played a lot still. Yeah, Incinerate totems are still there, but self-casting Incinerate, you just feel really strong. You just, who cares if you're standing in place? You get yourself that Sibyl's Paw max block, and you're just trucking things down. There's a lot of different variations of Incinerate, and of course the 3 Dragons Mask came out, and now you could shock with Incinerate. Despite it maybe not lasting very long, it's still the extra boost in damage. There's Incinerate right all around, and I want that feel with other self-casting skills. So my idea was, right now the whole meta with casting is totems, traps, mines. Mines not so much, but it's still there, and then the big one is trigger. And by trigger, I mean you got cast 1 damage taken. You know, you don't really see too many automated builds with that, but more so the other 2. Cast on crit, big time. You see it all the time. You know, yeah, it's squishy, but it's super fun. And then you have Mjolnir. Mjolnir, ever since that thing came out, it is stupid strong, super fast clear speed. So my idea to not necessarily fix self-casting, but give this self-caster a reward, is to add a new keystone in the Witch or Templar tree. I thought about this the other day. I brought it up to Hedgie. I brought it up with my stream. And the idea is to reward the player for going self-casting, but take away everything else. And here it is. You gain all damage and life totem nodes to apply to your self-casting spells. This includes life, the 8% life nodes or 10% nodes, damage, cast speed, and even summoning cast speed. I'm sure it's a coding nightmare to get that summoning cast speed in there, but it could help summoners with maybe Raging Summon Spirit, things like that. The downside is you can no longer use trigger effects. This includes cast on crit, cast 1 damage taken. 2 include Mjolnir. That one would be tough. And then you can no longer use traps, mines, or totems either. So basically, all the totem nodes in that area you can gain the benefit of. That just applies specifically to damage and life. Not so much the damage, you know, the less physical damage taken, not the resist, obviously not 2 totems, but to reward the player for going self-casting. However, they can no longer use that cast 1 damage taken. You can't jack up your cast on crit builds with it. And then behind that, I had an idea too. But yeah, actually, you know, before we get into that, I want to know what you guys think about this node.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the problem with self-casting is that, you know, the game always has to make checks on the possibility of, you know, breaking stuff. And what really holds you know, self-casting and just spells in general is the fact that they always are going to have to check it against, you know, the trigger gems, cast on crit. That support gem single-handedly makes so many like insanely, you know, rewarding builds for pretty cheap. And it's things like this that kind of like hurt self-casting. Like there's less incentive, but I definitely like the idea of, you know, you're not allowed to use trigger gems with this because number one, you know, you're going to get, you know, some more love within the nodes itself in the tree. And yeah, I just kind of like hate that they always have to consider cast on crit with any spell, and therefore it can't be as strong as it, you know, potentially can be.
You know, my intent behind this isn't to just overbuff self-casters. They're still, you know, Arc is insane now. But I just still feel like as a self-caster, you're like, why not just use a totem? They tank for you. Why not use a trap? You can use EE and crit. Just there's so many better options, I think, than self-casting.
Yeah, it would be nice to give like players a bit more incentive to do everything, like you said, self-cast. And those nodes that you suggested are really cool sounding. I think like that would be a lot of incentive to work builds around that.
Chad is also mentioning the fact that it costs a lot of mana to sustain it, and you know, with better leech mechanics, we can see, you know, possibly a return of, you know, more self-casting builds, or, you know, better reward for putting yourself at, you know, such risk with reflect, because that's like the huge thing. You're like, you want to go self-cast with, you know, crit and good damage, just put them on a totem and, you know, that's it.
And this brings me to my next part. You know how like CI exists, and behind CI there's like 4 awesome nodes. You know, leading up to the maybe I wouldn't say 4 awesome nodes. There's 3 ES, you know, general run-of-the-mill ES nodes, and then there's that more multiplier energy shield node. I want something like that behind this node too. Something like hybrid spell damage cast speed nodes, like a 6% spell damage, 2% cast speed node, leading to another good feel big node similar to the more multiplier. We could have like a 1% spell leech and 10 life on hit for spell node, or a 25% less damage taken from spell reflection. You know, do you think having these nodes behind, you know, this big keystone would be awesome? Good implementation and reward the self-caster even more.
Yeah, I'll start with this. I definitely like the idea behind putting keystones behind, you know, keystones or nodes, you know, just like the ones like acrobatics and CI. There's more great stuff that you can pick up that'll strengthen, you know, your side of the fence. At the same time, it won't make everybody else crazy strong, like that they're just so readily available. There's a consequence, like a legitimate downside to picking up a keystone and then taking all the goodies after it. So I really like the fact that, you know, we can get some, you know, leech. You know, life on hit is one of those things that spells have been dying to see. But at the same time, how do you break it? How do you, you know, insta full life with cast on crit? You know, like if you had any small amount of life on hit and you could hit in such rapid succession that it would just, like, you know, create an imbalance. But the way you have it set up, you know, it would prevent something like that from breaking.
And, you know, people are saying, well, reflect's not a problem. Just get max spell block and Purity of Lightning. So you're saying I have to be locked specifically into Purity of Lightning and max spell block. I think that takes away from the self-cast. Now your character will always have to run that. You should have more options available to you than just using the standard run-of-the-mill block OP, spell block OP. That's my biggest beef right now. You know, you got these staves. Staves used to be, you know, staves used to be the best. You know, you had a freaking Searing Touch, which used a ridiculous amount. You know, Terran Shiver 6-link was crazy during the whole Freezing Pulse thing. Nowadays, everyone's just like, screw it, I'm going to get max spell block and I'm going to get max res. And there's no other options for people that want to use stave still.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I, you know, wanted to design either a wand or a staff, just to make items more readily available, because there's so much potential behind the, you know, the way the tree is, and they're just not visited to simply because the items aren't there. And also, didn't you want to say something about staff block with casters?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obvious that there needs to be maybe, I don't know, just more love in general with block on staves. You know, 18% is the most you can get, you can get. And and obviously Terran Shiver gives that to you, but 18% is nothing compared to a passive 26 to 32% block you can get on a shield, and then roll block, and then shield nodes everywhere.
Yeah.
Staff block just needs love. It really does.
It's because it's mainly behind those physical nodes that just make them completely not worth even getting.
Yep. You remember, everyone's like, well, you could still... Staves give a lot of spell damage. Well, staves also don't give very much defenses. So despite, you know, all the spell damage you get off of it, it doesn't equal to 2,000 armor or 2,000 evasion or even the amount you can get off of the shield too.
It definitely would be nice to have like more passives behind notable keystone passives to further like enhance your character for like one specific role or like that specialization. So I think more like enabling passives after those keystones could be very like beneficial to certain builds and make like old builds that aren't played as much a lot more appealing to like more players.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially with the shield. I mean, it can come with like over 100 crit and spell damage and block and resist. Like they're just loaded. Like you get these one-handed shield combinations that just outshine staffs. Like you're gonna have so much more defense and, you know, implicit prefixes that are working, you know, towards enhancing your character. I think it's definitely something that needs to be addressed on the skill tree as well as on items. And I mean,
also, you know, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to me, one of the only reasons to run, you know, a staff is that you can run a 6-link, and then you can either not have a chest with the 6-link, or you can run 2 6-links. And I would like to see a staff build, maybe possibly behind Equilibrium, where you alternate between two 6-link abilities. I think that would be so cool, and one really big incentive to run, you know, a 6-link, double 6-link caster.
You know, it's going to be tough to see that happening because it just, you know, despite the amount of spell damage you get on a staff, you're still stuck with all those attack damage rolls that you get on a staff. So now it's a crafting nightmare. The side of staff versus, you know, like one-handed, obviously you can get a +1, +2, +1 all gems, +2 to certain gems, and thrown in power. Now you have a really beefy spell.
Right.
That's just another roll nightmare.
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up your connections, kind of crapping out.
How is it now? Is it basically?
I think you just need to talk a little slower, because once you talk fast, it starts to really crack out.
All right, you know what? Had you hit up your segment? I'll go inside.
So for my segment, I wanted to, you know, reminisce and talk about some of the trends we've seen. I've been playing for a long time, and I've seen different leagues. And I wanted to talk about the economy and trading scenes and how they differ from what they are today, and possibly like a prediction of what may happen in the future. If you're interested in, well, that's a lot of feedback. If you're interested in, you know, on how to, you know, what's the best way to make your currency, or what kind of investments you should make, this would probably be a great section for you to tune in on. First, I'll just start with the regular hardcore, softcore leagues. You know, people were saying it was like Path of Range back in the day. This was the infant stage where everybody was still figuring out the rates. I mean, we were at a time where exalts were 1 to 5 GCP, and chain gems were even selling for 3 GCPs, like just normal chain gems. And you know, the community was still figuring out the game, still figuring out, you know, what's valuable, what's not, how often we're seeing it. Then we transition into our.
Hey, Genji, before you go into that, you remember that feel when you got an exalted orb or one drops and you're like, I could buy 5 GCPs with this now.
Yeah. 15 chaos. You know, it was just like, geez, this is like so little compared to what they are now. Then we transition into Anarchy Onslaught as our first 4-month league, arguably called, you know, Path of CI, where everybody was just going, you know, ES. And towards the end of the league, you know, the recipe for level 20 gems was discovered, resetting your level 20 gems with the GCP, getting 20%, and that greatly changed. For about 2 weeks, GCPs were just fluctuating in price out of control. The people that knew it beforehand really capitalized. I noticed there were a lot of people that were just constantly, you know, pumping out 20% level 1 gems every week, and I was just like, how are they doing this? They're so low level, you know. eventually somebody spilled the beans. The recipe went viral. It was one of the biggest like economic changes in that specific league. Another thing, it was unfortunate that this league was probably the league that had a crazy amount of botting, which GGG reacted by hiring more support, and they continued to whip out the ban hammer. And we noticed a rate of 100 to chaos to 1 exalt shoot down to like 35, 40 within a few weeks. This got a lot of flack with the hardcore players, and they started to call, say that this is what destroys a league or whatever. Personally, I think it makes the economy, different. I mean, even though the botting was there for a period of time and then was removed, how do you guys feel about, standard leagues and hardcore leagues even being called dumpster leagues?
Personally, I never understood why standard got so much hate. It's developed for a long time. It has legacy items, and like early standard, there was a lot of people making a lot of currency. Like before they changed the chaos recipe, people were farming normal Merveil and doing like the chaos recipe a ton. But standard just has a lot more supply, and like for demand, some items like they're worth a lot more because they're going to go to the people that will pay for them. But for standard being called a dumpster league,
well, hardcore is too.
Yeah, hardcore. I just think that it gets a lot of hate from people that they think too much about what others have, like item-wise or orb-wise, and that bothers them, when I feel it shouldn't have as much of an impact as it does on how like they evaluate or value the league.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Ian.
I don't know. Standard's just like, for me, it's just to test a league. Like, oh, I got this guy with a respec on it. I'll just borrow some gear from my friends, or I'll just test out this spec. That's all it is to me. I think the economy's too shot in the ground, and when I'm watching like people like KG stream, and I'm like, what? That's like 1,450,000 exalts with